Hey guys, it's Jess Paul and welcome to my
7th
day of Vlogmas. When I knew I was coming home, I had the idea that since I'll be around all my possessions, and a lot of people are here because of music in general from Wrecked Radio, and we're doing the 2009 to 2019 thing, which also caps a decade of me being on YouTube. That's terrifying. I thought I'd actually go over something that was really personal and had lots of stories, which is my CD collection. Oh no. So we're gonna have a little bit of a multi-story time of how I discovered some of my favorite bands, and this is an interactive video. Since I know a lot of you, love music, I want to hear the weirdest way that you discovered music. If you do have a story that's kind of alternative than just like hearing a song on the radio, I think that's super fun. Actually, let's start over here. I got this stack right here. It's of the first rock band I ever really loved. I talk about Third Eye Blind as kind of like my oldest favorite rock band because to this day I feel they still are, but there are bands in my past that I really loved at one time and slowly kind of they fell out of favor, or I got sick of them, or I grew out of them. Matchbox 20, I used to listen to these albums over and over. I was always a little bit behind when it came to discovering music. Like, I would discover a band or an album often 10 years, 5 years, a couple decades after they actually existed. That happened to me constantly until I actually started doing Wrecked Radio and research things kind of timely. I was kind of listening to Matchbox 20 at the same time that I was burning through my Third Eye Blind albums, and they really spoke to me. They basically defined my childhood, so that if I hear some of the deep cuts that are on the album, I'm transported back to being a teenager. In the woods, took these CDs on hikes. Forget nature, let's listen to Matchbox 20. I have a stack here of albums that were the first albums of popular bands now that I don't know where they went wrong. Maroon 5, Songs About Jane, John Mayer. This more so is the example of what I just said. Another example of a CD I don't have in physical is 303, where the bands came on to the scene with a certain purpose, and then as time went on, it seemed like they just kind of melted into the common way of creating radio hits, churning out things that they knew would sell, and a lot of them along the way lost what was kind of special to them. Maroon 5 used to be a band. This is cool. I found the radio edit and the LP version of One Headlight at a garage sale, which I guess is something that we should talk about next. In a previous episode, I've explained how I used to find a huge chunk of the music that I used to listen to and the bands that I used to like. I probably will still do this even if I became rich and famous. Used to scour garage sales for whatever, really. I would always go to the CD bin right away, but we found all kinds of junk, and I probably still use, wear, collect a lot of those things that I found for cheap. And besides the low cost, it's just interesting to see what people have in their life that they're passing on to you. Like when you're going through somebody's CD collection, you're going through like a period of their life. It probably meant something to them, and then they're like, okay, why do I need CDs anymore? I don't need this. So they'd give it to me. Some of the artists I had heard of but never really checked out, and a lot of this was the beginning of my taste, the taste that bled into Wrecked Radio curation and why I was listening to a certain style of music. Weezer, found Weezer at a garage sale. G-Love and the Special Sauce, anybody ever indulged? Live and REM, two bands. Actually, I don't know if I had heard of Live as a teenager before I actually found their CD, but one of these albums, I have quite a few that everybody was getting rid of in garage sales. If you don't flea market or garage sales, it's funny because you tend to find a lot of the same artists over and over again. I don't know why that is, because people get rid of things for all different reasons. So I actually really got into Live at the time. It still has the $2 sticker on it from the garage sale that I'm talking about. I can remember a couple of the songs that pinpointed parts of my life as I was growing up. I even used one of their songs again that I would have never used now because of copyright issues. In one of the first short films I ever wrote, I never count it as my first film because it was very high school, though I should. I mean, why not? But it was called The Ascension of Kings, and then it was called Breathing Contests, and my sister ended up directing the final version, the finished version of it when we were in high school, and I played a part in it. I wonder if it's on the internet anywhere. That'd be weird. I'm gonna link it below if I can find it. I think it might be on my sister's channel. Jimmy Eat World, this was a $4 album. This album actually specifically continued to be one of the most significant albums for me, kind of transitioning from my early teens to my late teens. Led Zeppelin, and this was the first album, their number 3, that I discovered at all. I have always heard of the band, of course, when I was growing up, but I never actually knew what they sounded like. Such a classic. This is the first Nirvana album that I was ever introduced to, unlike people who maybe started on Bleach or Nevermind. Their last album was the first album that I ever discovered. You know, when there are very, very, very popular bands, I was once talking to a friend who was like, did you ever hear of a band called Nirvana? Or do you like the band called Nirvana? And I'm like, yeah, everybody does. Do you guys ever feel like this, where when a band is so popular, like legendarily popular, I sometimes find it hard to connect with them or have what I call like ownership over the band, because they don't feel like they're mine. They don't feel like I discovered them organically because they always just were there. Nirvana has always felt like that for me. So many people have connections to it, but my personal connection was found it at a garage sale. With a lot of these albums, I actually can picture the day, the garage, the table at the flea market when I picked these up. But as I kind of made these CDs my own, and even before I realized what a cultural impact some of them had, I connected certain memories with it. Like, for example, Penny Royalty. When I was 17 years old, I contracted a stomach bacteria, something that I actually still get off and on to this day, and it's cured with cranberry juice. It's called H. pylori, and half the people in the world have it, and it only bothers an amount of people. Anyways, so I remember discovering and listening to this song, and I created this piece of art that it's somewhere in this room, and I'll probably put it up on the screen here. I created this piece of art when I was really, really sick, and I basically couldn't eat anything without it hurting my stomach. So if you ever have that problem, that might be it. I just realized that I failed to mention why that was significant. So if you didn't know, Kurt Cobain suffered from stomach problems, especially later on in his life career, and drinking Penny Royalty was something that soothed his stomach. So I could relate at the time. But also, if you have any significant connections to bands that we all know and love, go ahead, put them in the comments. I have a little collection of soundtracks from shows I loved. I've got Charmed and a couple Buffy soundtracks. Eagles of Death Metal. There's one soundtrack that, like, literally I found so many bands that I now listen to extensively to this day, and it was the Lost Boys 2 soundtrack. So the sequel to the Lost Boys soundtrack. It was a pretty mediocre movie. I'm a huge, huge fan of the first one, but the soundtrack to the second one, fell in love and started listening to, like, I can think of like 4 bands, including Eagles of Death Metal, and also one of probably my top 10 bands, which is Hold Steady, and they had the final song, and I feel like this song kind of defines me. Like, when I think of this song, I'm like, this song is me. It's funny, it's weird, it's a little bit hard, like it's got those kind of chugging guitars, but it's really strange. The song's called Knuckles, and I use it for my text tone to this day, since I was a teenager. Now, this pile is actually the CDs that gave me this idea, because I think it's a really unique part of my collection that if any of these CDs were to be sold or my house burned, I would hope that these ones were the ones that were saved, because they're the ones that you can't just like pick up on iTunes. Companies and brands like Coca-Cola, American Eagle, Surge, they would put albums together and they would sell them as, I guess, a kind of cross promotion. A lot of them were up and coming, which is really cool. So you were getting the first taste of a lot of these bands that we know now. I don't even have the cover for it. It might be somewhere else. It was Pepsi's Pop Culture album. And I'll zoom you in. No, that was the... I just remembered I don't have zoom on that lens. But we've got Collective Soul. We've got The Cars, 7 Mary 3. But we also have a little band that I'm obsessed with to this day called Big Wreck. This is how I discovered Big Wreck. It's from this compilation album. Never heard of them before. They have the song How Would You Know on it, so that was the first song that I ever heard from them. I downloaded these songs, of course, to, my iPod at the time, and that song always stayed in the mix, and it wasn't love at first sight. It was always a good song to me, but over the years I was like, man, I really like that song. I wonder what the rest of the band sounds like. And then I downloaded their album In Loving Memory, and the rest is history. I saw them this year for the first time, best concert I ever went to, and it was all thanks to hunting down garage sale albums. One thing that if you are a musician, in this day and age, one thing that I do recommend and implore you to do is, within your marketing, try to get yourself on soundtracks and commercials. That sounds like the opposite advice that any music authority would give to someone because it sounds like selling out. But one discussion that I remember having between some of the YouTube rock hosts was that when it comes to the public now at default, knowing that they can get music for free or with a really cheap monthly subscription, you have to find other ways in order to make your living. You have to find other ways to make your living with a lot of the arts, with something like short filmmaking. You don't make money off that, you just lose it. So you have to find ways in order to use your art in order to make an income. You have to get creative. Times have changed, and when you see your favorite band on a car commercial, know that that is the only way that they're probably getting paid because you are not buying their music. I have some local bands and some rec radio stuff. Ride Your Bike is I think literally one of the first rec radio dial, as I used to call them, bands that I would promote at the end of my shows. Basically, it started by people watching the show and, smaller bands emailing me and say, hey, I'm a startup, could you, maybe announce me on your show or something like that? I'm like, that's a great idea. Why not try to give decent bands a platform or help rec radio fans to discover new bands. 24-hour taco shop. They won our local Battle of the Bands 3 years in a row. Oh, look at this. It's Benty's first album, Purple Pumpkin and the Friday Fritters. I think that was one of my ex's bands. Do you guys know any local bands that have changed their name 6 times and you don't know what they're on anymore? Gene and the Werewolf. This is actually kind of a more modern version of that. That sticker, that $9.99 sticker is printed on there. They're blowing up. It's still in the plastic because Spotify. Oh, this might be the cream of the crop, to be honest. So, when I was younger, I used to make my own CDs, my own mixes. Not only, though, would I make individual albums of mixes, I would give them album covers and names. Silvertown Studios present. That was my studio, as if I had anything to do with making these albums. They were some of my favorite, early 2000s, 90s radio hits that I was being really nostalgic about. In fact, here's one called Why Not Remember. What's on here? Scar Tissue by Red Hot Chili Peppers. Lullaby by Sean Mullins. Remember that song? Unpretty by TLC. It was a mix. It was a mix of genres. The first song on this album is Slide by Goo Goo Dolls, but I thought it was Matchbox 20, so I had to cross it out and write Goo Goo Dolls. One thing that I do, it's a big cliche, when I am dating somebody, I'll make them mixtapes. Classic mixtapes. Well, obviously CDs. And they would make them for me too. It was kind of always a way that I got to know somebody a little bit better. I always thought that learning what they love when it comes to music taste, even if it's not the same as my own, really kind of let me into that different level of a person. And I just always did that. I'm embarrassed. I've got some MGMT here. I used to be obsessed with MGMT, if anybody remembers, because I'm sure I talked about it on Wrecked Radio. It was at that time. MGMT was another band that I was like full on, this is my favorite band of all time, for like a year or two, and then I was really exhausting myself, and they also kind of shifted and changed. I kind of like a lot of what they were experimenting with later on, but I didn't become as obsessed with it as I did their earlier stuff. I used to have a giant picture of Van Weingarten on my wall. He was like shirtless holding kittens. This is the Time to Pretend EP. I feel like this might be a little rare, but I might be like deluding myself. I'm like, oh my god, I have this. It has Time to Pretend, which I think it was like the kind of demo version. It's got Kids, Indie Rockers, which was one of my favorite songs of theirs. Wow. The memories are flooding in. The memories. Then when I was in college, we had an assignment where we got to recreate an album cover. I worked really hard on this one, and I didn't end up liking it as much as I thought that I would. In college, and to be honest, for a lot of my life, I hustle up to the last minute with doing things. I've gotten better at organizing my time and taking my time with certain things, but there are some things that I just leave to the last minute. I worked so hard on the cover for so long, and then when it came to turn in, because this was like one of my final projects for one of the years. I remember like campus being pretty empty as I was running sleep deprived. I only slept for like an hour that night to hand this in, and the inserts were the last thing I did at like 3 a.m. I was taking texture photos of surfaces around my room. Like, this was the top of my refrigerator that was stained with coffee rings because my mini fridge was right next to my bed, and I would just use it as a side table. I feel like I ended up liking the inserts a whole lot more, even though like I did it so last minute. Like right here, I wrote the lyrics to one of their songs on a magazine page and then took a picture of it, and it kind of ended up being kind of creative. When you're forced to fly by the seat of your pants and execute the first thing that comes to your mind, I'm not saying to make it a rule to do that all the time, but sometimes interesting things happen. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed some of those stories. Again, interactive video. Please, in the comments, I read all comments. Like, subscribe. This is Vlogmas, but we usually have a show called This is Jess Paul. We spin a game show wheel, and I do a different subject every week. Now to dust all of these off. I hope you guys are enjoying Vlogmas. I hope you guys are enjoying the holiday season. I have a couple more to go. If you want to spend time with me, come back. Keep watching the videos. What else would I say? Bye, guys.